Okay, well, we're going to get started. Martin Kilcoyne is the sports director at KTVI TV Fox 2 here in St. Louis. Kilcoyne anchors the 5, 6, and 9 p.m. sportscast on Sunday through Thursday nights. And from 2006 to 2010, he was the Fox 2's play-by-play announcer for the St. Louis Rams preseason football games. You can also hear him on 550 KTRS radio. So Martin, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more than the information that we had there, and feel free to share with us whatever is on your mind.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I know we were trying to do this in person, but kind of like everything in the world right now, it's been flipped upside down. Nobody really knows what's happening. But as Karen mentioned, Fox 2 sports director. I've been at the station since 1997. I thought it might be fun. There's not a lot of current sports to talk about. That's usually what we start with when we have an event. I can talk about current life, I guess. And then I thought I'd just kind of tell you a little bit about my background. And if there's a way to communicate questions, normally in a group setting, we just kind of open it up to the Q&A, and maybe there's a way they can message.
They can put them in the chat. If they'll
Sure.
put them in the chat, and I have one already that we'll cover.
Okay, yeah. So feel free throughout. Maybe I'll say something that'll trigger a thought, or usually it triggers angry emails. It's usually at work. And when you get an email at work, it's almost never. I was an intern in Milwaukee years ago, and the sports guy was kind of a nutty. This was right after the Zip for Zeppa era in St. Louis, where everything was kind of like wild and wacky. And this guy was really that type of sportscaster. And he told me when I was an intern, he said, when you get back to the sports office after you were just on the set, he said, never answer the phone, because he said they never called to say good job right after the show's over. But you know what's weird is I'm looking here and I'm like, I really need a haircut, but TV people are not exempt from what's going on. A friend of mine in Milwaukee, he posted online that he did his own haircut, and people chimed in and said, BS, that's a back alley haircut. We can tell the difference. You got a professional haircut. You think you're better than us. So I guess we're all going to get shaggy together. I think the weirdest thing for me right now is I'm working more at home than at the Fox 2 studios and doing a lot of Zoom interviews. The upside of that has been, it's been kind of fun because, you know, you have a kid like Bradley Beal, went to Chaminade. He's an NBA star. When the league shut down, the basketball stopped. He was second in the NBA in scoring. It was over 30 points a game. We ended up doing about a 20-minute Zoom. He had just teamed up to donate $250,000 to the St. Louis area food bank. Normally during an NBA season, you're not going to get that kind of time where you can really visit and talk about the career. The other night we did a Willie McGee, Ozzie Smith combo interview. And the idea there was, if you just talk to Willie, like in this setting, it'll be okay, but he's not going to have as much fun. You get Ozzie and him, and they were just going back and forth, ribbing on each other. You know, when Willie McGee was with the Cardinals in 1982, he was a rookie, and I had always heard that Ozzie Smith let him live at his house. So I just threw that out there, and Ozzie said, yeah, here's the problem, Martin. He didn't leave. He stayed for 2 years. And Willie, it was a very funny exchange, and people, you can still find it at fox2now.com. But they really throughout just kind of were ribbing and one another, taking jabs. And you know, some of those moments have been kind of fun doing stories like that. Certainly we all, you know, miss the games right now. I found out my wife is a really good teacher. I'm terrible. I think it was our 9-year-old was sitting there the other day and she said, maybe why don't you handle gym instead of math and English? So I kind of know my role. But I would say career-wise, you know, I think growing up in St. Louis, I wanted to be Jack Buck. I mean, every kid that was listening to Cardinal baseball, that's, you know, not every kid, but a lot of people love sports. Wouldn't that be a great job? And it was sort of a thrill years later when I was a young sports reporter at Channel 2. I got to know him a little bit, and there would be like, I'd be about to go live on the field at the Old Busch Stadium, and if it was raining, you know, your guest wouldn't show up, or the player that says he's coming never shows up. And I'll never forget, more than once, I would run down into the dugout, and Mr. Buck would be sitting there. And here I'm a kid that grew up wanting to be him. It was surreal. And he was always the same, was always funny. And I'd be like, Mr. Buck, is there any way you could join me at, you know, 5:20? And he's like, I'll do it, but you got to tell me who stiffed you. I want to know what level of guest I'm replacing. He always would ask, who stiffed me? And he said, I'll raise my game if it was, you know, LaRussa or McGuire or whoever. And then he would come on there and steal the show because he said, somebody tell Dave Murray it's not raining. He said it was going to rain. I mean, he was just great. And I don't even know how I got off on that tangent, but grew up in St. Louis, Glendale, the mean streets of Glendale. You get caught on the wrong side of Berry Road, you could get, beat up if you were Kirkwood, Webster. Glendale's like Switzerland in between Kirkwood and Webster for people who take that rivalry real seriously. But I went to CBC, and everybody in my family had gone to SLU, so I was considered a rebel. I just wanted to do my own thing. And after that, I went to Marquette University, Jesuit school in Milwaukee. And we had lived in Milwaukee when I was a little kid. My sister was going there at the time, and my mom had gone there, and my dad went to medical school there, and that's where he met my mom. So there was a lot of Marquette ties in the family. And to this day, some of my best friends are from Marquette, and my wife calls it the Marquette Mafia. We have our own little cult going. But I went to Marquette, got out of school with a degree in broadcasting. And my dad said after, 4 years of Jesuit education, he said, "What does that get you, a degree in broadcasting?" Well, he found out quickly because I couldn't get a job, and I ended up working for an installation company in Milwaukee doing labor during the day, and I would intern at night at the NBC station in Milwaukee. I was referencing the sportscaster who would give me all this advice back in the day. But I did that for almost a year. Meanwhile, my friends were at law school or getting their MBAs or working as engineers, and there I was questioning the career path I had chosen. And I finally, all you would do back then, you would send out a tape, and the stuff you did in college was terrible. Like if we aired it now, it would look like a blooper reel. But at the Milwaukee NBC station, I could kind of get some practice runs. And I ended up getting a job in Flagstaff, Arizona over the phone. And I remember getting hired. They didn't have a budget to fly you out. And the news director, she said to me, "Hey, I hope you understand, we're in Arizona, but we're up in the mountains. This isn't Scottsdale or Phoenix, and there's a lot of snow." And I said, "I've been in Milwaukee the last 5 years. There's no way it's any more miserable or cold or snowy." So I took the job, packed up my 1980 Oldsmobile, and moved to Flagstaff. And I was there for less than a year, but it was a great experience because we were the only station in town, and we did Northern Arizona University sports. So I got to travel with the football team to Pocatello and Boise, Idaho. And those are my only 2 trips ever to Idaho. And was there, like I said, for less than a year. Then I moved to Rhinelander, Wisconsin. This is a very glamorous, Bob Costas was at NBC, I believe, at age 30. This is a little less glamorous resume. But Rhinelander, Wisconsin is way up north. And for whatever reason, in a town of 8,000 people, they had an NBC station. And the story was an old state senator, manipulated the license to put it in his hometown or something. It was really weird. But you'd cover ice fishing and deer hunting and all these things that I didn't grow up doing in Glendale. And I'll never forget my first ice fishing story. I went out onto the ice, and I'm walking, I'm carrying the gear, I'm shooting everything myself. And I would take like one little ginger step. I was walking real slow because I thought, what if this cracks? I got this gear on me. I'm going to go right through. And as I'm taking these real small steps, a giant pickup goes flying by me they're all driving their trucks and cars. And somebody said, "It's about 4 foot thick." So I learned quickly that it's another world up there. And the story on ice fishing was almost a bust because it was mostly men standing around. And I realized they're playing like Nerf football and drinking beer. And for those who have not been ice fishing, you just have these ice tips into the water. And in one of the interviews, I said, "It doesn't really look like you guys are doing anything." And they said, "You're not going to put that on the news, are you? Because our wives might see that. We tell them we went out fishing all day." They basically, ice fishing, if anybody says they're out ice fishing, they're drinking beer and goofing off. I learned that. But I was there about 3 years. And then I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, it's a great place to live because it's a fun college town and it's the Big Ten. So from a sports standpoint, you're covering Big Ten sports, but Milwaukee's an hour away. So we would cover the Brewers, and then Lambeau Field in Green Bay is about 2.5 hours. And between Rhinelander and Madison, covering the Packers, I've probably been to Lambeau Field for work 30, 35 times. And it's, for football fans, it's still a shrine to go to Lambeau Field. I just happened to be there at the time Brett Favre was coming along. So the teams were good and it was fun. But I always kind of wanted to get back to St. Louis. So I would send some tapes, Channel 5 and Channel 4 and Channel 2, and just kind of keep in touch with people as best I could. And in the summer of '97, I got the job at Fox 2. And it just happened to be a good time because Dick Vermeil had just taken over the Rams. The summer I got here, 2 weeks later, Mark McGuire was traded to the Cardinals. Keenan had just been fired within the year previously, so the Blues were going in a new direction with Joel Quenneville. And just in the last 20 plus years, it's amazing how many good sports events, big sports events we've had to not only watch, but I've gotten to cover. And the moments are two people say favorite moments, this or that. You know, the Rams winning the Super Bowl was unbelievable. And that season was unbelievable. And on Fox, we carried all the games. So we were, you know, front and center with a lot of it. But it still wasn't really our team. And so when the Cardinals would win, you're like, oh, that's the team I grew up watching and going to the stadium. When the Rams won, it was very cool, but we didn't have that big emotional connection. And because of that, I think when the Blues won last year, it was so different from anything else because I used to go to the old arena with my buddies. And that franchise had been trying so much. The Cardinals had won a lot. The Rams were new. It was okay, but it wasn't this deep bond that we had. The Blues winning to me last year is probably my favorite, just because the franchise seemed to be cursed along the way, like bad things kept happening. And then when they lost game 6 at home, I thought, oh my God, they're going to do this. They're going to drag everybody this far, this close, and then have a huge letdown. And then we went to Boston and they won convincingly. And I can only imagine the people that were there were probably about 1,000 Blues fans that were there. And once the game ended, the Boston fans vacated. And it was better that it was Boston because they've won so much and they can be a bit a little cocky up there. And for those 1,000 or so fans, they all kind of gathered down behind the Blues bench as the celebration went on. I'll just never forget that. But Cardinal moments, there's too many to pick. My favorite game, I will say, favorite moment would be the Blues winning the Cup. And I'll end with this. My favorite game is still the NLCS in 2006 when the Cardinals were trying to get to the World Series. And they were playing at Shea Stadium against the Mets in New York. And winning a game 7 on the road is going to be tough. Shea Stadium is an old building. You could kind of feel it rock when it got loud. And Scott Rowland had been feuding with Tony La Russa, and they were not getting along. And we could talk hours about Tony and feuds and players and fun. But so Rowland got himself back in the lineup and hits what would have been the big home run in the game, except this Mets player jumps over the wall to catch it and rob him of the big home run. And it would have been the perfect Rowland story. If that doesn't happen, they're still tied. And now I have to go into the tunnel. And if I do ever write a sports book that nobody will read, I was going to call it My Life in the Tunnel. Because when Isaac Bruce caught the winning touchdown and Mike Jones made the winning tackle in the Super Bowl 34, and then when they lost to the Patriots on the last second field goal in Super Bowl 36 in New Orleans, all of these times I'm in a tunnel waiting to get on the field because the next thing up is our reports and our live interviews. So you're always in line to get to the field. So you never really experience these things. The Super Bowl, I was up watching the TV. Now my perspective in 2006 at Shea Stadium was different because it was in the tunnel, but it was behind home plate. It was an old stadium, and there's sort of this tunnel that went down, and all you could see was kind of the back of the umpire and the back of the catcher. So Molina hits the home run at the top of the ninth, so I'm like, they're going to win it. Standing behind that tunnel, waiting to go on the field. The game was on Fox, and all of a sudden, and I'm standing, all these New York cops are next to us because they're going to go on the field no matter what happens to kind of for security. And Molina hits the home run at the top of the ninth. And all of a sudden, here comes all this champagne on carts going by. And everybody's kind of down and out, the New York people. Well, then they start putting some runners on. And even the New York cops are screaming, bring the champagne back. Come on, we're going to win it now. And all I can see down that tunnel is the plate. And Carlos Beltran comes up. You guys know the story, but Adam Wainwright is on the mound. He's a young kid. And all I could see, I saw that curveball in the tunnel go in, and I knew they had won, and we went right out onto the field. And after they celebrated a bit, we got an interview with Adam Wainwright. And I said, you're a young guy, this setting, what were you thinking? And he said, Martin, honestly, when I came in the ninth inning, I told myself, whatever you do, don't let Beltran come to the plate. Like, don't let enough guys get on. And sure enough, what happened, Beltran, who had killed him 2 years earlier, was at the plate. But for all these different reasons, the New York cops, the champagne, and then before we could get out of the field, that crowded tunnel, it was Matt Dillon gets whisked by the actor. And then the other guy, I'm forgetting his name now, he was in Bull Durham. married to Susan Sarandon, Tim Robbins. So Tim Robbins and Matt Dillon are these huge Mets fans, and they're walking by looking dejected as we're kind of tussling and fighting our way out into the field. For whatever reason, that game has always been my favorite. But I've talked plenty. Karen, Deb, and whoever else is out there that wants to chime in, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Okay, we've got a couple here. Deb, do you have something you want to ask before I start asking these questions?
Well, just Martin, Coach Krause wants to know if you're still working on your dunking.
Coach Krause is one of my favorites. He was my sophomore basketball coach. And he always told me, he said, I was good at talking. But I said, but I'm a basketball player. He said, yeah, well, you're better at talking than basketball. But yeah, the dunk is CBC, I always say, they helped me decide early on my career fate because they let me know pretty quickly that I wasn't going to make it playing sports.
Well, he said you were a joy to be around.
Oh, that's great. I love Coach Krause. He's ageless, too. He always looks the same.
Yes, he does. Okay, Karen.
Okay, we've got Rob Schneider wants to know, please tell us about your radio career and how it has changed over the years. I come from a radio background and I've always been fascinated by the changes in all types of media. He's currently working in print right now, but he wants to know what you see the changes.
Well, sports radio specifically is really chaotic, or I've found it to be, because you end up with a lot of different owners that come in and take over stations. So working at Fox 2, I would have radio opportunities. I would appear, as a guest here and there on a KMOX or KTRS back in the day. But then 590, I started doing a show in 2004 with Tim McKernan and Jim Hayes. And we were just kind of goofing around. We were all sports guys, but we weren't really that serious. And the truth is, people responded more to that. You'd be out in public and they'd say, oh, that funny comment you made the other day, or that joke about your brother or your mother or whatever. And you'd be like, what about that interview we had with so-and-so? And they're like, yeah, whatever. So I was there for about 2 years doing that show called The Morning Grind, and we had a lot of fun. And after a couple of years, got into it with management, quit for a while. So I've been at a number of different stations. I think I've been at 590 3 different times, partnered with Frank Cusimano. We always joke we're TV rivals, but radio colleagues. But radio is really changing right now, especially because everybody wants to listen to what they want to at that time. So if we have the world's greatest interview with Bob Costas at 10:30, but you were at a meeting or at lunch or wherever, you missed it. So things have to live on right now on the web. And I think that's why podcasting became so popular. People that might enjoy a great interview with Brett Hull, but they're working all day, would rather put it in their ears at 5 o'clock when they're walking around the neighborhood. So I see why podcasting is taken off. But a lot of fun in radio. It's usually a little chaotic. The TV guys like it, as you can tell, we like to talk. And in TV, we don't get to talk because the weather's always next, or weather went long before us. They're always in my ear saying, that's enough, wrap it up. And so when we get on the radio, we love it because we can really talk. But business-wise, it's getting tougher right now, I think, for owners and stations to make it all work.
Well, I know from my business with social media that it's staying above the noise. And I think that's what you're doing with some of those comments and the fun things. It stays above the noise. It segregates you from the others. So very good. Okay, another question. Kelly, our interim director, wants to know, did you have a favorite player that you've interviewed or a memorable interview that you've done?
I would say over there's a handful, and Adam Wainwright is near the top of the list because not only, and I hate when people say, oh, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. It gets thrown around a lot. And in fact, I have a neighbor, older guy, we watch some of the games, and whenever the player would come up to bat, neighbor Bill would say, oh, I bet he's a great guy. I bet he just thinks they're all because he loves the Cardinals. And I'd say, yeah, they're not all great guys, but Wainwright really is, and he does it in the community. But he's also a good soundbite, and we tend to gravitate to the people who are interesting, who say something interesting. Wainwright would be near the top of the list. Kurt Warner was on par there in terms of being accessible, polite, and nice. And after everything happened and he exploded onto the scene, even that next summer, we're up in Macomb and there are fans everywhere, and he would stay behind. And he got to a point, I think he had to autograph ahead of time cards, he would hand them out. But I was real impressed early on that it didn't change him. Players like DeMarco Farr was on the Rams. He was a great talker. others who have become like Aeneas Williams, who's in town. They've kind of become friends. Isaac Bruce and I, during his career, he wasn't a great soundbite. He was really quiet, but since then, we've become pretty good friends, and I host all of his events in town. I did a TV show with Marshall Faulk, who could be real crusty and not the easiest guy to deal with, but he was good on TV because he knew a lot. He was smart, and we're still in touch. But some of my favorites, Carlos Beltran, who I mentioned in conjunction with Adam Wainwright, he was about one of my favorites. He was only here for 2 years, but one of the classiest, nicest people I'd ever been around, and he was a big star. He's since gotten caught up in this whole scandal with the Astros and the banging on the drum, and it's unfortunate. He was going to be the Mets manager, and they had to let him go. That aside, he was a total class act. And it goes back to 2004. The Cardinals were playing the Astros in the NLCS. And after one of the games, I was assigned to the Houston locker room. And Beltran hit a home run like every at bat. It was something crazy. And I went into the Houston locker room with my photographer, and we're standing there. And every reporter was speaking Spanish. Houston has a really strong Spanish market. And I would be like, real quick, hey, Carl, I had a quick, and I just could not interject. And I'll never forget Carlos Beltran. He went like this to all the guys. He said, guys, hold on a second. He said, this fellow over here has been waiting a long time. Let's let him ask his question. And that always stood out to me. And that was years before he was on the Cardinals. So he's up there. He's one of my favorites. There's too many to mention. I'll tell you one on-air moment that wasn't a disaster. It was a mistake. It was probably my first year back in St. Louis, and I was down at Columbia, Missouri, and Mizzou made a bowl game, which they hadn't in a long time. I was going live from their football stadium or wherever, and somebody handed me a flyer because they wanted to sell tickets. It was the early days of the internet. And so I'm reading it as it's handed it to me, and I said, hey, by the way, if you want to go to this bowl game, blah, 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 but get those tickets right now. Get online, or I didn't think I said get online, but I said, it's mutigers.com, okay? And I sent it back to the studio, and Randy Naughton, who's on our morning show now, was in the studio doing sports. And famously, she said, Martin, do we think that's mutigers or MU Tigers? And I was like, nope, says mutigers right here. So live TV, you never know. To this day, Randy and some others, when they talk about Mizzou, to me, they just say mutigers.
That's great. Okay, Deb, have you got anything you want to add to that? I've got another question.
Feel free. Go ahead and ask the question first, and we'll roll from there.
Okay. This one says, what really makes St. Louis sports fans so special? It says, baseball fans cheer for great plays no matter what team. Players love to play here in all sports. Good ownership is always rewarded with fans in the seats. The majority of St. Louis fans are friendly to the opposing fans. So what really makes St. Louis sports fans so special?
I think it's the connection that they have with the players, because I'll give you a headline from today. Marco Scandella plays for the Blues. He was traded here in February. He's only played 11 games. He's been in the league for a while, and they've always liked him. So they just signed him to a contract to stay. And one of his quotes to Jim Thomas in the paper was, I just love the fans, and I love being here, and I felt connected from day one. I think players get, it's fun to be in New York. It's fun to have the energy of Fenway Park, but there's so much negativity in the East Coast. Some of the fan bases, not all of them, they're great fans everywhere, but there is negativity. And I think for players, you love the fact that there's such positivity, because they're already beating themselves up. Well, I haven't scored a goal in 20 games. I get it. I don't need a tablet that says he's an ofer or whatever. I think they take comfort in the fact that the fans are rooting for him, that they don't get vilified in the media. I mean, it's an interesting topic. It could be like a thesis paper where they say, is St. Louis a soft media market? And you could define it certain ways, but it might be that sort of what the fans want. They don't want hatchet jobs. They're not going to read it. They're going to run you out of town if you're a hatchet person, that's sensationalizing all your sports. So I think it's connected. I think that the players feel comfortable here, and the fans feed off of that. And also loyalty. I mean, I think that the Blues fans especially kept going back. They'd be disappointed year after year, and they kept going back and kept showing up and supporting the team. And I think that's it. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the players say, what do they want most? They want people in the stands. They want to play in front of a crowd. And they want it to be hopefully somewhat positive. There was an old Cardinal coach, Hal McRae, who told me once, he had played a long time in the league. And he said, the difference between Philly and New York, he said, New York fans, they will get angry. Philly fans show up angry. And so I think they like the St. Louis vibe. A lot of players enjoy that.
Thank you. Another question here. Dave Adams wants to know, what is your favorite memory covering golf in St. Louis?
For me, that would be current. And I know we all kind of live in the theater of the now, but the PGA Championship and being there, and Tiger Woods is, 50 yards away. And then later, I guess, interview-wise, probably 5 yards away. But just seeing how people kind of turned out for that event. And Tiger Woods wasn't known for being warm and fuzzy either. And he finished second in that tournament. And yet I've never seen him in all the years I've watched golf, haven't covered it closely, but just seeing him so happy. And even the next morning, I think it was the Monday after the event had ended at Belle Reve, he sent out a tweet saying, thank you, St. Louis. I'm still thinking about the weekend. And just the way that thing came alive, a major event in our backyard. We don't have a lot of golf events. I used to cover we used to have the Boone Valley Classic, which was sort of fun. And in fact, we pulled some video out the other day because 20 years ago, the final round had no fans. No fans were allowed. And we're talking a lot about sports now where they may do it with no spectators. But the final round out there, there'd been so much rain. All they have out there are these giant fields for people to park in. Well, it was a muddy, disastrous mess. So on the final round, they had no fans allowed in the building. And we dusted off this footage where you can see all these bleachers that are just empty. Meanwhile, there's Tom Watson and Arnold Palmer. It was sort of surreal. But for sure, number one would be the PGA Championship.
Don't you think, Martin, that with the PGA and the way we had so many fans there, that really helped St. Louis as an overall sports town and not just a Cardinal town?
Yeah, I think for sure, because there's always this narrative that, hey, if they have a big event in St. Louis, they will all show up. They'll all show out. And I think when the crowds were the way they were, and it helped that you had Tiger Woods playing all weekend and playing well. That got even more people probably interested. But I think it absolutely added to this idea that if you have a big event, whether it's a Winter Classic, NHL All-Star Game, that you're going to get just support across the board. The corporate support, the media support that want to promote it, kind of show the world. And the PGA people kept telling us, this is bigger than the Cardinals in the World Series. And we said, well, yeah, but it's not the same. They said, well, think about the impact. You're going to have reporters here, and you're going to have TV coverage going to Asia, going to Australia. Golf is truly international. And I haven't traveled that much out of the country, but when you are in Italy, I've been in Ireland, you pick up the paper, golf, PGA golf is always on the front page. And so that exposure too, I don't know what that means. Are people watching in Asia getting on a plane to come here and eat Ted Drewes? I don't know. But for sure, we're being seen around the globe. So they may have had a good point there.
Okay, another question from Kelly. Do you have any hobbies away from broadcasting?
Well, not enough. My wife is the handy one around that. It's funny because I was doing one of the Zoom interviews the other day with Joe Buck, and we're talking about a couple of his different projects. And I said, you were on Twitter, Joe, you said you were outside with raking leaves or something. I said, I don't picture you as handy. And he said, everybody says, I got this from my dad, and because of my dad, this, that, and the other. He said, I can guarantee you, I am my father's son when it comes to being at home. He said, my dad couldn't even light a fire in the fireplace without the fire department showing up. So hobbies, I like to run. People are always like, really, you run? I love music. I like going to concerts, especially with my wife. Usually have music going around the house. But mostly my 9-year-old son, I'm trying to turn him into an athlete that I wasn't. And we're working on it. He kind of likes golf. He's real skinny, unlike his dad. So hanging with the family, doing family things, try and get some, if not a jog, a walk. I like to get out every day, get some exercise. But I really miss going to live concerts. We usually would, even if it's at a small venue, down at the old Rock House or just different venues around town. It's fun to see live music. I hope at some point we'll be allowed to do that again.
Definitely.
Okay, another question from Joe was, were you at CBC with Larry Hughes?
It's a flattering thought because we're about 10 years apart, but Larry broke all of my records years later when he scored, I think, his first 2 baskets. But, Larry's class of 97 at CBC, and I was class of 86. And that was back in the old days. We used to be down off Clayton Road, right by Forest Park. There was the famous Parkmore restaurant on the corner there. We didn't have cell phones or internet. So if your parents, the young kids today have no idea. If you're 30 seconds late, they're texting, "Where are you?" We used to walk down the street, go to this little restaurant, and you just sit on the curb and wait. You might wait a half hour. You might wait 45 minutes. Your mom was coming, your dad was coming. You didn't know. You just waited. But no, Larry, superstar, that came along a little after me.
Is there anyone from the sports industry you haven't interviewed that is at the top of your list of those you would love to interview?
Well, I would say right now, if he'd do it, and he wouldn't, would be Stan Kroenke. And that would be number one, to sit there and ask the questions and talk to him. And never do it. Even before all of the Rams negativity began, when he was the owner, we used to try and get an interview. We would request it constantly. And they would always say it's under review. But that's a little bit more, I guess, a negative story. A guy who, this is kind of off the radar, but Carl Edwards was a NASCAR, and I'm not a huge NASCAR follower, but he went to Mizzou and was a star, and he just quit and gave it all up and moved back to Columbia, Missouri. And I'm sure, got plenty of money, got a nice life and everything, but I've always kind of wanted to get to him because I think people would be fascinated why he walked away when he did. I'm trying to think of the Boone Valley I was talking about. Another thing I remember is Arnold Palmer was there, and my colleague at the time, Joel Goldberg, we were like, I said, I'll go Wednesday, you go Tuesday, or whatever the days were in advance of the event. Well, the day he went, he came back and said, "You'll never believe this." I said, "What?" And he goes, "They gave me Arnold Palmer for an interview." I'm like, "Oh, I picked the wrong day to sit back at the studio." But I think right now the interview to get would be Kroenke. It just will never happen.
Can you
There
just give us
particular?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go
Kim.
ahead, Deb. Go
Can
ahead.
you just give us 1 or 2 thoughts of what you think about the soccer, situation, the stadium, and them, hopefully coming to town and all this works out?
Yeah, I think that's happening, and certainly the economy is in the tank for everyone. Luckily, the money behind this, and enterprise is going to be hurt just like everyone with what's going on, but you have the money, the enterprise, the Taylor family money is there. They'll get this done. Stadium is underway downtown. They're still doing work as we speak. March of 2020, and the last I heard, the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, Louis Reed, told me they were on track to open that up. So I think it's great. I didn't grow up playing much soccer, and I don't know a ton about it. And in our town, I wouldn't, and I say that because there are plenty of people who know a ton, and you got to be careful. You can get exposed quickly. But I think it's great. It's another venue in town. It adds to the sports landscape downtown. And the league's growing. And I don't know where it's headed, but in 20 or 30 years, with concussions and all the concerns about injuries at the NFL level, it's possible in 20 or 30 years, you'd rather have an MLS than an NFL team. I think that is possible. It sounds crazy now. So I think it's good for the future. And the venue they've talked about, we're talking, 20,000 plus. They want to do some different events there. Maybe a high school football championship could be played there, lacrosse games and some of this minor league soccer that could take place. So I think the venue is great. The idea that it's right near downtown. You kind of have this corridor now where Busch Stadium gives way to Enterprise, Union Station, and all of a sudden there's the soccer all right in a row. And I think it'll be a hit. I really do. I think there's smart people involved in the league. Smart, dedicated people that are local that want this to work. The Taylors had, for years, sports radio guys like me or Frank would be saying, "God, the Rams need a new owner. We need this." We would always spend the Taylors' money for them. Say, "Oh, they need to buy this," and everybody would tell us that's not who they are. They're kind of quiet, reserved people. So this came out of nowhere that they emerged and said, "We're going to do it, and we think the city needs it." And so I'm excited about it. I hope everything stays on track because I think it's going to be a big hit.
Super.
Deb, is there anything else you'd like to ask?
No, not at this point. I just want to say a big thank you for you coming out and spending some time with us. And right now we don't get to use a lot of sports time anywhere. I mean, everything on TV, of course, is 2 years old or a year old or whatever it may be. But it was really great just to talk with you and learn a little bit more about you, and just appreciate, you coming out and talking with us. I know it looks like we maybe have one more question, Karen, or are we
Mike,
pretty
actually,
close to being
I
done?
figured I put my CBC education to work, and I found a way to follow the chat. But I think Rob was asking about the Battlehawks. We had the XFL team, and I think everyone was sort of stunned how quickly that went under because it was
I can't believe
popular. When that league started, we were all kind of skeptical, and then it was taken off locally. And I talked to their president the other night, Kurt Hunziker, who was a St. Louis guy, went to Mizzou, had a really good job with minor league baseball. He left that to come here to run this team, and they were way ahead of projections. He was, the XFL as a league, were sort of giving him a lot of guidelines, and they wanted him to bring in about, he says, between 4 and 5 million they were supposed to do in revenue for the season, the team. And he said they were going to be at about 8 or 10 million. So they were just doing great. And we always kind of said, wouldn't it be terrible for the St. Louis football fan who's been through a lot, disappointing, if the team's a hit, the fans show up, and then the league goes under? And that's what happened through no fault really of anyone's. I mean, this is unforeseen. But yeah, the Battlehawks, I'm surprised how much it took off. And I think even the Battlehawks would tell you, we didn't realize it was going to be this big a hit. It was fun to see, but boy, that ended quick.
Yeah, it did.
Was there ever a player you interviewed that surprised you, more or less meaning their demeanor, etc.?
I mentioned being in Wisconsin, and at the time we did a Monday interview when I was in Madison, and it was a paid for deal. But we had Brett Favre as a Monday guest, which was great. And it was my first year in Madison, and we set up this, I guess it's before Zoom, but somehow he was online and I was online on satellite. We're talking, and he said, he's I'm going to tell you something, Martin. You ask me anything on a Monday. I don't care what it is. And he said, even if it's a terrible interception that loses the game, you can ask me about that. He said, you know what? I'll pretty much guarantee that I'll do that once or twice. And I loved how honest he was. And it made for better TV, because that's the reality of it, is the players that are willing to be open are just way more interesting. And a lot of them are guarded for a good reason, especially now. It's really tricky. But the one thing I would add to that surprise, I've had a really long and good relationship with Tony La Russa. And there were times it wasn't always good, but what I've always said, it would surprise people how polite he is and how nice and how he gets along with everybody, because he could be surly. He's so competitive, and he could really bark at you at times. But I think it would surprise people at home how much fun he can have, how funny he can be, and how loose he can be, as long as it's not in the middle of the game or right after the game.
Is there anything that really stands out in your mind as funny that has happened along your career?
Well, when I was in Rhinelander, really small town, really small station, you could kind of do just about anything. And once a year, Dick Clark's bloopers and blunders, they would call the NBC affiliates, and I think we had one phone in the newsroom. I happened to answer it, and they said, I'm with, Hollywood Productions, blah, blah, blah. And they said, do you guys have any bloopers or blunders? And I said, that's all we have. I mean, that's all we do up here. And there was a clip one night, it was daylight savings, and the new female news anchor in the middle, the weather guy, who's now a sports guy, who's a friend of mine, he turns to the newswoman and says, hey, it's daylight savings. Everybody adjust your clocks. And with that, she turned to me and she goes, well, looks like you won't be sleeping over tonight. And I said, well, that would be news to your husband. And she frazzled. She said, oversleep. I didn't mean sleep over, oversleep. And haha. So that clip made it to Dick Clark. And my dad called me from Denver. He said, hey, you finally made it national. It took a blooper to do it, but we all got these contracts in the mail. And the guy must have called back from Hollywood, and he said, here's the deal. We want to use that clip and that daylight savings joke, whatever. And he said, we'll give you $100. And I said, oh my God, for $100. I said, I'll say the F word on the air for 50, you know, whatever. We did have a lot of bloopers and blunders. And then one that was after hours, we were all really young, out of college, and had a lot of energy, and we wanted to fix the studio. It had been the same since the 70s. So on a Friday night, we went in there and we started painting the background and the logo, the peacock, and we just decided we were going to change the whole look of the whole studio. We were sick of it. And we had, you know, some beers sitting out there. We're just having fun on a Friday night. And our director was a young guy, and he said, let's see what this looks like with the lights on. You know, does the color work or not work? So we're sitting there for a while, just kind of admiring our work and what it would look like. And phone rings, again, probably the one phone. And I picked it up, and the guy said, yeah, hey, I was just watching WJFW. He said, and I saw Martin drinking beer and painting some wall. And I said, what? The thing was going out over the air to anybody in their cabin or in their backwoods apartment or whatever. That's actually the programming they saw instead of Conan O'Brien one night was us on TV drinking beer, painting the walls. It's probably an FCC violation. But yeah, the Rhinelander years alone, we could probably write a book on.
It sounds like fun.
And believe it or not, I'm running off to the studio. So I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks for the questions. And I'm glad we waited a couple weeks. So now that I'm a little more versed in Zooming.
We appreciate it so much.
We really appreciate it.
The
All right,
Fenton
take
Chamber
care.
thanks you so much, and especially taking time out of this busy situation with all the Zoom and all. And again, the Fenton Chamber thanks you and all of us that have been here today as your audience. Thank you so much.
I used to spend money in Fenton, a lot of it at the Molly Brown's fireworks shop up on the hill. That was one of my, we could ride our bikes from Glendale. It was a little hairy, but that was one of my spots.
Well, once the world gets back to normal, we'll have you come out and speak at a luncheon. That way you can at least get a free lunch too.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.